We are recording. We're on our best behavior then.
Yeah, so if we give them a minute or two to trickle in before we get started.
Sounds good. Welcome, everybody.
I see my mom on here.
Yay. Ottawa, I hope you're holding strong. Love it. So we'll just wait for some more humans to trickle in, as Ian just mentioned in the comments there. Let us know where you're from, where you're joining from. We'd love to know how you hear about us and where you guys are all located. Today's going to be another really good one. Sunshine Coast, yay. Quebec, salut. Nice. New Brunswick. We've got Chile. Comox, Edmonton, the island, Stony Plain, Alberta. Love it. Was that a romper room thing when you would like look through the big thing and be like, I see Ian and I see Amber?
I remember that.
Excellent. We've got Edinburgh in the house. Amber's making content as one does. I love it. All right, I think we're at 2 minutes after. It looks like we've got a good selection of people who have joined us. So if you're not opposed, Ian, I think I'm going to get tucked in.
Let's get going.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and welcome to this episode of Connected Conversations, The Shape of Things to Come, a body of work on weight and health with Amber Hewitt Garcia. Amber is someone that is incredibly generous in sharing her personal experiences. And she does this in the name of spreading the right information and really challenging that narrative that many people have around living with obesity. She is fierce, and I am confident that we will have a lot of really good takeaways from today. And I know there's probably a lot of directions our conversation will go. But before we get tucked in with Amber, for those of you who may not have joined a Connected Conversation before, Connected Conversations is a monthly series brought to you by Obesity Canada. Connected Conversations is dedicated to really having the conversations that we know that we want to have as patients, as people living with obesity, those things that are genuinely important to us, from advocating for access to evidence-based information, issues related to diet culture, weight bias and discrimination, and to innovating obesity care, here in Canada. We'll be joined in our episodes with different people who have lived experiences or experts working in the field of obesity to really help educate and enlighten everyone about the complexity of this chronic disease and the barriers that individuals living with obesity really, really do face. So if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting me, my name is Lisa Schaefer. I am a patient advocate and a member of the patient community here at Obesity Canada. As ever, my friend in the trenches and the person that I do all of this work with is Dr. Ian Patton, who is the Director of Patient Engagement here at OC. Ian, I'll let you introduce yourself and maybe touch on some of our housekeeping for today.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that intro. So my name is Ian Patton. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Public Engagement with Obesity Canada. And I'm really excited about today's session with Amber. I know over the last couple ones, we've had some health professionals and doctors and people, dietitians, talking about important issues. But one of the things that I think is most important is having that lived experience and people who get it because we lived it. And Amber is someone who I look up to as a patient advocate. And I've learned a great deal from her work down in the U.S. with the Obesity Action Coalition. So I'm really excited about today. A little bit of housekeeping for today. As always, you can connect with us using the Q&A feature at the bottom or the chat. I'll try and monitor that as best as possible and filter in as many questions as we can get to that we can answer during our conversation, and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. All right, so you've got reaction buttons, you've got chat features you can use. let's get into this. The Shape of Things to Come, a body of work on weight and health with Amber. Amber is an advocate and a mentor at heart. Professionally, Amber serves as the senior director with the Tennessee Department of Education and has her own consultancy firm. Ian and I have had the pleasure of meeting Amber as a member of the National Board of Directors for the Obesity Action Coalition, OAC, which I kind of reference as our sister organization in the US, where Amber has volunteered for over 9 years, including 2 years as chairwoman. With over 75,000 members, the OAC provides education, advocacy, and support for individuals affected with obesity, and is an ongoing support for those of us here in Canada. Believe it or not, they are so generous with their resources and time and talent. Amber is a passionate advocate and has frequently lobbied Washington, D.C. for access to care and travels the world collaborating with other patient organizations to combat weight bias and improve access to care. She's a founding member of the Global Obesity Patient Alliance, GOPA, where she represents the United States and is a 2018 recipient of Medtronic's Bacon Invitation. Bacon? Correct me on that one. This award is given to those individuals who use their extra life to advocate. Most recently, she was selected to represent the United States as a diarist for the NCD Alliance Project on Accessible Healthcare. That is a lot. And I will have to say, my biggest recommendation is that if you ever have the opportunity to sit near Amber at a dinner party, I highly, highly recommend it. She enjoys politics, traveling, cooking, finds amazing deals online, and is very quick to share links. That is something I greatly appreciate about you. She's a delightful family, including her daughter, Parker, who I am personally very confident is going to change the world. So welcome, my friend, Amber. Yay. So
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we are so excited, girl. You have no idea. So I know Ian first introduced me to you in New Orleans back in 2017. And that was my first experience with the Your Weight Matters conference, which is absolutely amazing. And for me at the time, I think that whole event felt like a bit of a revolution. And for me, it was like, I felt like for the first time I was in this room full of patients, as well as these experts, all related to obesity care, who really get it. And I know getting it is a really challenging place to get to, and it is not an easy one, but I'd love to start there with you a little bit and find out about your patient story and kind of how you became one of those people who gets it.
Yeah, I get to ask that question a lot about, like, so how did you end up as a board member with somebody who wasn't a medical professional or somebody, you know, it wasn't an obvious like trajectory of volunteer experience. And like the short answer is that I just kept showing up. So in 2009, I actually saw an article about a young woman who was 14 and she had undergone bariatric surgery. And the comments online were pretty awful. I had just had my first bariatric procedure. And I was just like, there has to be an organization that like stands up for people. And I was like, I literally was just searching online. And at the time, the OAC had an advisory board. I joined as a member. And then after 6 months, I was reading all the newsletters, taking part in some of their actions they were, posting about. I think at the time they had about 10,000 members. And I just kind of was like, I'm really interested. I have my first email to their now VP of programs. I said, do you guys ever do anything in person? I'd love to help with that. Not knowing that our first convention 4 or 5 years later, I would be a board member and I volunteered to lead that. So it was very meant to be, but I joined their advisory board and then was invited to apply their national board. I think it's like this recognizing when other people are being, I feel like it's like recognizing the injustice of how people are treated both by society, but also the medical system. And I think that for me, actually getting care has sort of burned the flame brighter for me.
I love that. I love that. It's very true.
I was going to say it's an interesting point there, because from my experience with like support groups and patients that I interact with, especially post-bariatric surgery, for me, I've noticed that there are a lot of people that like once they finally do access that care and they've kind of gotten some form of treatment or something like that, and things start to change for them, they in a lot of ways sometimes kind of go a little bit more quiet. They aren't the ones that are gonna stand up and speak out and kind of, like you said, ignite that flame. of trying to make a difference, they kind of think, okay, I'm done my part and I'm gonna fade off into the back. And so it's always refreshing and nice to see that people are, stepping up and speaking and sharing their experiences even after they've experienced some form of obesity care.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something I've seen as a patient advocate, and it happens a lot. And it happens a lot with individuals who've had bariatric surgery, but it's also individuals who've lost, 50 plus pounds. Is this idea of an after photo, and I talk about it a lot. Of that, I don't feel like an after photo. I'm a moment in time of somebody who's received a lot of care. But I think where I don't fault individuals for talking about it in that way, because I think we talk about obesity as a disease in that way. We talk about only weight or obesity through the lens of reducing our weight and reducing our body size. And we know those things are not exclusive. That's part of treatment. That's part of what happens. But you can treat obesity and not actually reduce or ever achieve a body weight or get to a body weight that's considered a normal BMI. So this idea of there have been times in my life at different weights where I felt like I had my hunger under control. Like I felt like I was able to get in really good shape. It's not always dependent on the size, my clothing size or what the scale says. So I think when you see obesity as a complex, chronic, lifelong, relapsing disease, you say you can't possibly ever be finished. And so getting to that point where you feel like you can sort of put obesity in your pocket, it's always with you, but it's never gone. That's where we're trying to get, right? So it doesn't feel like we have, we have something chained to us. It's something that's controlled. And for me, I've had non-metabolic and metabolic bariatric surgery. I've been through a couple revisions, and I think Lisa just put in a post that kind of goes through my journey. But it has been multifaceted. I've used pharmacotherapy. I'm a big advocate for mental health care. I see a therapist every other week. And you just continue to unpack how it has really impacted every facet of your life. So, and I think that's something that even individuals who are living with it want to forget. But for me, I can't.
One of the things that in kind of planning this episode, I think even in just trying to formulate a title, we really struggled because I know there's so many different ways that we could go. I love where we land because I think it is a body of work. And that to me feels very organic and something that's living and something that's going to iterate as well. And I know that you put a fair amount of content out online, and that's something that you're really working on. And that's something that has really resonated with me because you are so candid and you are very generous. But one of the even just introducing that hashtag that you started using, cared for, not cured, was really powerful for me because I know you and I have had this conversation, and it's something that I'm really stuck on right now is like, I don't wake up and go to myself, Lisa, you're almost 48. How have you not figured out your astigmatism yet? I don't do that with my glasses, but I still do that even as a really empowered patient advocate when I'm thinking about my treatment options that have been really helpful for me with obesity, being, a pharmaceutical one, going, should I still be taking this? Of course I should be still taking this. So that's one of the things that I really appreciate about all that you share is that it is multifaceted and it does need to be complex and it does need to be kind of an army of humans helping you do this.
Yeah. I think I've had a couple other experiences in my life that I think the self-advocacy, and I think it's different country to country, but I know this is true in the United States, is that the way that our system is designed, if you don't advocate for yourself, there is a good chance that no one will. And we are at the there are lots of well-being programs. There's a lot of preventative services that are covered, but at the end of the day, there's a money equation, and if we can delay or withhold care, I think it's extra easy with people living with obesity because they believe this idea that it's fully within your control. So I don't want anyone to mishear that me as saying that diet and exercise are not important. They're very important, right? They're very important for any chronic disease that you're living with. Like, your personal decisions really matter. And there are things to help so that you're not, some people, that point is exercising 3 hours a day, or they have to, I know when I was around like 180 pounds, still trying to get into what was, quote, a normal BMI, to be in that weight loss sort of like calorie range for me was 900 to 1,000 calories. I was working 60-hour weeks with like a 2-year-old, and I was running for office, and I was like, I literally feel like I'm going to die if I eat this. So there has to be something that helps. And there are lots of things medical professionals can add to that diet and exercise, to that healthy lifestyle, that doesn't make it feel like it's so either impossible or difficult each day. I heard a doctor say once, he's like, yeah, of course, diet and exercise can, there's a formulation that will get you to a normal BMI, but life might suck. And that's what it felt like for me without any intervention. And then you just said something, Lisa, and I lost my train of thought a little bit. So I'm going to kick it back to you, and I'm going to try to remember where I was going.
Perfect. That's perfect.
And cared for.
No worries. And that's something that I think is just, as I've said before, really resonated with me, and something that I think is really important for us to translate for people in our patient communities, that there really isn't a finish line. There really isn't an after photo. That this is going to be this is going to keep going, and we might not know what it looks like. And, even myself, I just did a closet purge this weekend, and I'm just like, oh, should I get rid of that size? I don't know. But one of the things that I've enjoyed in this moment of clarity that I feel that I personally am in my journey is, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm able to be present in a way that is very different than my past, because I'm not constantly going, well, when I get to X, or when I figure out Y, then I can do whatever that thing is. And not that I was saying like, I'm going to wait and not live my life, because I'm on roller skates right now, let's be honest, right? Like, it's not that I was waiting, but I still had, for whatever reason, I wasn't really here today, right now. And I find that something that's really interesting. The mental health component of all of this, I think, is more powerful than we give it credit for. Sorry, go ahead.
I think I talk a lot about this, I think, particularly on my Instagram account, about sort of the daily ways that weight, there were two versions of Amber's lives running parallel. The other one would have been, I just got back from DC last night, just spent the weekend with friends. And yesterday morning I went on a Segway tour. Okay. Now, I'm not the most balanced or coordinated person, but I got the hang of it. But that was like the most stressful part of the situation. But, at my highest weight, and even not my highest weight, I would have been over the weight limit. I would have had some of my friends go on, right? So this is constantly doing that mental math of whether you're going to fit in the world, or whether your body is going to keep up with the things that you want to do. And I always felt and it felt that I'm a really energetic person, had a lot of stamina. Chances are I probably would have participated. But, I use the example even in a reflection yesterday, that when we got to the Lincoln Memorial, we had 10 minutes. And I ran up the marble steps with my best friend. I was like, we got to get a picture. 245 pounds ago, I would have not used my 10-minute break to run up the marble steps to get a selfie in front of Lincoln. Like, that's just not how I would have spent my 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that impacts you socially, to feel like you can't do the things other people around you, even outside of medical treatment, right? Like that day-to-day life. When you talk to people, like, we talk to a lot of companies or doctors or physicians who talk to us a lot about getting to a certain number or certain BMI. But when you talk to patients, the outcomes they really want are being able to go to, Disney World for the day with their grandkids, or get in the floor and play with their dog, or, be able to not worry about whether they're going to be embarrassed if they go get, their annual pap smear, right? Like, they just want to feel like day-to-day life doesn't include a calculus of whether they're going to be embarrassed or shamed or put out over their weight. I've talked to thousands of patients, and it is a mental math that is like like if you have static on a television and turned it down really low and just kept it on all day.
That hum.
That is what it feels like.
Persistent hum, right? And when you were speaking, when we were speaking earlier, and you were talking about that advocacy side of like when you see kind of injustice happen, I've often referred to those as like absolutely what a lot of what you listed are, in my mind, injustices. And quite frankly, they're moments of dignity that I feel like those of us that live with obesity have been robbed with our whole life. And, you know, I jokingly in my Lisa way will say, you know, if you've been checking the tensile strength of a chair since you were 5, that's going to leave a little bit of a ding. But I say that jokingly, but that is really, really true. And I love that conversation that you and I had briefly last week as well, when we were talking about that disease distress kind of moment. And that fact that if you're walking around with that, to your point, it does impact everything. And I think there's a lot of, I don't really want to use the word privilege, but it seems like the right word to use right now, that we need to help people recognize, because they don't even understand what it's like. The fact that someone can put off doing a internal or a pap smear for years and then get there and then be asked to lie on the floor for your internal exam because we don't have a bed that will work for you. How likely are you going to go back to take care of any of your basic health needs? That is beyond the lack of dignity. That is just like, that is so harmful. And that's part of what we need to help people understand in this moment. And by people, I mean patients as much as the rest of the world.
Yeah. I think when we talk about bias, we talk a lot about, you know, the literal words we hear from other people and the internal dialogue, that internal bias, which I would argue is actually our biggest challenge, the things we think and believe about ourselves. But I think when you think about weight bias, and OAC has a great campaign called Stop Weight Bias. So you could go to stopweightbias.org and check out more. There are other ways that bias shows up, and that is including the physical environment of a doctor's office. So if you even aren't like, you're not to the point where like you're ready to do a deep dive of the way that you're speaking, which you should, but thinking about people first language, are the images that you're presenting with educational materials, non-stigmatizing, but do you have chairs that accommodate larger bodies? Do you have exam tables? Do you have scanning equipment that actually, like, you can actually refer your patients? Like, all of those things are part of a biased environment of like, it literally sends a message that you don't fit in here. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the answer is advocating there. And if they're not receptive, it's find another doctor. I've had many doctor shifts over the years. Some of them moving and just needing something different. And some of them have just been flat out disrespect. And I think this idea of, we're all experiencing this. Like, I think I talked to very few people who go, I have a great medical team. I feel that way now. But I feel this way about elected officials too. It's like, they work for us. Mm-hmm. Like, they don't get an easy pass, right? Like this is a constant interview. Like, and I'm supposed to challenge you to get what I need. You know your body best. And it happens, I think it happens to people living with obesity, but I think it happens a lot to women. It gets chalked up to like, well, you're a new mom or you're under a lot of stress. But not discounting that you know your body best. And I don't, like, we can push for treatment options and we can talk about, I think we can change the landscape, but I think that self-advocacy piece isn't going to go away. We might be offered things more often, but we really have to change this. What is the relationship we have with medical providers of like saying the hard things about not being treated as if interventions aren't the failure. I think this idea of like patients are not the failure, the interventions are the failure. So we need to try a new one of like, one may not work. You might need multiple at the same time. I make a joke all the time. I had my best friend at work started pharmacotherapy. She lost 65 pounds and I got a headache. I didn't see any difference. I was like, I'm convinced they gave me a different prescription. We were completely like non-responder and super responder sitting next to each other. So this idea of like going in to say like, I haven't failed, I'm doing my part. Now what else can we do? Because you've seen the amount of care that I've had of like, there's always something that you can look at and examine and tweak. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think that like self-advocacy moment and what you said about, you know, your body best is really, really important. And I think can shift us to the next kind of arc of our conversation here too, because one of the things that I felt personally was in trying to manage my obesity using just the diet culture that was highly accessible to me, I actually lost a lot of connection to my own self, to my brain, to my body, and to what I actually knew was probably doing more harm than good. And that just, I want to hug myself and smack myself at the same time, looking over my shoulder, but here we are. And here's how I got to who I am today. Right. But I think that is such a big part of this, is that really knowing that your body is not lying to you. And how do we get back in tune with our body and really trusting ourselves? Is there anything that you've tripped upon or that you very purposely focus on to try and help connect that?
I think for me, I spend a lot of time writing. Some of it I share publicly, some of it I don't. But I have to force myself to reflect, because I think for years of sort of like burying it deep, not to get too personal, but I was like, I'm going to compartmentalize it and move on. Like, and that's how I was. I'm an achiever, like ENTJ Virgo, like I'm going to like check, we're going to climb this ladder. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll remember what you said to me, like, you know, scrolling my list of enemies, but I just kept going, right? And sometimes, and then like, so this idea of my leadership had to evolve to be conscious to things that I was feeling. So I like this, there's this book called 15 Commitments of Leadership. And one of them is feeling all your feelings through. And you don't have to make yourself right or wrong about it. You just have to acknowledge it and let yourself process it. And sometimes that means bringing things up with other people. Sometimes it's like practicing forgiveness for yourself. But I write a lot about how I'm feeling. And usually I get to like that thesis statement by the end of like, okay, I'm actually, so I just had an experience with my like OBGYN, for example, and I'm really mad that it took as long as it did. I got test results on Friday for something that's super easy to fix. And I've been talking about this for 2.5 years, and I go, why did I let them treat me that way about something that wasn't weight? But I had been so focused my whole life on getting treatment for my weight that I was like, wait, this other thing that I could have been doing it here. I had untreated ADHD for over a decade. And it took that long to get, I was like, wait, this is what your brain's supposed to feel like every day? So it's just those understanding what works and translating it.
Go ahead, take a sip. I totally agree. And I think that it is so fascinating. I think this was the case for me. Ian, I'm wondering if this is the case for you from a male perspective as well. As the stronger I feel as an obesity advocate or patient getting obesity care, the more I've had to learn about myself. I feel like an emotional toddler sometimes. And really that like new muscle of putting boundaries in place has been a huge part of my journey. But I don't know, does that skew more female, or does that resonate with dudes as well? Because you get to speak on behalf of all the dudes, apparently.
Yeah, because I'm representative of all the dudes.
No pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar, maybe not to the same degree for us. You know, I experienced, as you guys were both talking, there are certain aspects of that I resonated with and I connected with, but yeah, I don't think it is as, at least for me, it's not as prevalent or as strong for me on my end. I think advocating for me for obesity care was something that I think came a little bit easier for me just because of the training and background that I had. I'm curious about what it would be like for people who didn't have that, and that's a big part of why I do the work that I do. Is that I think we could do a lot better for those people, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that that's an issue.
So I know another moment, Amber, that you and I have kind of chatted about as well is that, even at my largest, I wasn't exactly a shy wallflower. I get the sense from you as well that you're a lady that has been pretty comfortable stepping up to the mic your whole life, regardless of what was happening for you. But I know that isn't always the case for a lot of us. I often describe us as a cohort of people that don't know that we're allowed to show up and take space. And I often describe mine as a happy accident between after school specials and whatever was happening in my household while I was growing up has made me okay to kind of stand up and demand better. But I also am recognizing more and more that I demand better for everybody else but myself, and really trying to put myself in a position where I deserve care, like speaking on behalf of myself directly, has been a big shift in my world. But I don't know that that's the case for you, because I think that you have a little bit more of that chutzpah than I maybe had. But I'd love to find out from you that moment for yourself, or talk a little bit about that and what you've seen in your advocacy of like people shifting into that moment of taking care of themselves.
So I have through my social media platform, I would say rarely a day goes by that I don't get a message. Definitely not a week. At least once a week, somebody will message me and say, I know what I need to do, but I just can't bring myself to do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it's bariatric surgery. Sometimes it's even having that conversation. Sometimes it's just acknowledging what they've done in that moment with that message. And I've thought about this for, like, I guess what I've said to people is that life is long, but life is now. And it's clear to me when they're talking to me that they're waiting to live life until they're in a thinner body, or they're in a place where all of those indignities that we've described stop accumulating or stop bringing them down, or when their job is right, or when they're with the right person. And like, they're waiting for the perfect conditions, which I liken to like being the right time to have a kid. There's like never a right time. It's always going to be chaos. Like, you're just going to have to do it. But this idea of like, life will pass you by. Time will keep moving. And you deserve a long, healthy life. And that this sort of like shame people have for saying they need help is something that I've, like, it's taken a long time for me to relate to. Like, I think maybe it's entitlement. Maybe I like show up thinking like, well, this is what everybody deserves. Of like, I had a good friend say, surgery just seems so invasive. It is. It's absolutely invasive, but it was what I needed to have a meaningful reduction of my weight, to be at a size where I felt good and healthy and living the life that I wanted to live. And that I hope in 20 years that the science, we understand sort of the molecule to the extent where you can walk into a doctor's office and go, well, you have this type of obesity, here's this drug, right? But we're not there yet. We're not even close to that. And so what we have right now is what we have. And I don't want to wait 20 years until we might get to that place of having, less invasive care. So yes, I'm doing this in the hope that if my daughter has the same struggles as me, that she goes into a doctor's office and has less invasive, less, just like, we understand obesity as a disease more comprehensively than we do right now, but we do know enough to say that there is effective treatment. But at least I think the other thing you were getting at, sort of like that, like loving who you are no matter what your size. I don't think obesity and like and wanting to get treatment for it, which does typically result in a smaller body, has anything to do with the value that you have, or sort of like the level of which you belong in a space, right? Like, I guess I think some of that is from family, right? Of sort of like, I witnessed my mom and dad, they raised a first generation of 4 kids who all earned college degrees, who all had, healthy, successful families. And they, we're a new generation, right? It happens. So I think this idea of like, you get what you ask for. And I never, I just had really sensitive, I don't know, that like, how dare you talk to me tendencies that way. And I think some of it was it definitely was earlier in my life, whether it was with girlfriends and having a crush on someone of well, I don't know if you're their type. And I was like, I'm a woman. Yes, I'm their type. And it's really saying it and sassing it to the point where you're like, I'm just going to go for it. I've never regretted going after or saying something or doing something. But I would say my list of regrets are times when I didn't say something, or I look back and go, oh man, I really missed that moment, or I should have done this. People will treat you the way that you let them. And so stop letting them treat you poorly.
That's a really good point. And I think that is something we should all take away from today's session. But as you were speaking there, I kind of was thinking about my own journey and what I went through, and when I was trying to seek out treatment or asking for help, and it was something that I was very ashamed of for a very long time, and it was something that I didn't want to do, and I let my disease progress farther than it should have before I finally got the care that I needed. And I think there are a lot of people out there who either don't know that there's things that can help them, or that it's more complicated than we previously thought about it, or they're just ashamed. And even when I started getting treatment, I got comments about things like going for bariatric surgery, and people saying things like, oh, you're taking the easy way out. And that one gets me every single time. The shame that's connected or tagged to certain treatments really gets me. And if someone wants to say that I took the easy way out, well, when it comes to my health, of course I'm going to cheat, or, it's not cheating. It's not taking the easy way out. People who've been through it know it. But of course I would. I want to live longer. I'll do whatever it takes to live longer and be healthier for my family. And, I think we really need to kind of destigmatize the treatments and asking for help, and normalize asking for help when you need it, recognizing those things. And that's something that I let go too long, and I wish other people would learn from my mistakes, I guess, is how I would say it.
I think I've mentioned this before of I've known I had ADHD for a decade, and I was like, I've got other things to worry about. And, I've talked to, my therapist is an ADHD specialist, and he was like, essentially you're a pile of coping mechanisms in a trench coat. You have definitely figured out how to work around it, and you have what I didn't know were extreme systems in place not to forget things, or to be really people talk about me all the time of being really well planned out, or really thorough attention to detail, which are the opposite of ADHD. And I was like, yeah, I write everything in a I have a to-do list. I break things down into goals. I spend a whole lot of time remembering things that people keep a mental checklist of. And then when I started medicine, and I was like, wait, this is what executive function feels like. It's sort of yeah, you can do it, but why what did I prove over the years by like building up these coping mechanisms? And we do it with our weight too, right? Like it's why some of the funniest people I know are people living in larger bodies, right? Like we use humor. We start developing these defense mechanisms, starting making jokes about ourselves before somebody else can do it. It's just this like, or we bring in the list to our doctor's office because we get that panic because we were just waiting to hear that. Like I just saw somebody in the comments about having a problem with their foot, getting referred to a dietitian. We know it's coming, right? Everything is going to come back to our weight. And we show up in those spaces with those coping mechanisms because we've been untreated for so long.
And I know for myself, one of the messages that I really believed is that I was incorrectly human, and nobody could really figure it out. So it must be me as the 8-year-old in the room that needs to figure this out then, right? So I also very much, because I felt so incorrectly human, I wanted to be perfect in any way that I could, any way that I might be able to manage this situation. I'm going to get the gold star. That is exhausting. That is an exhausting way to navigate life. And much like you, I, a year ago, was also diagnosed with ADHD, which I find the more I'm learning about ADHD, the more I'm understanding my brain, kind of how I navigated my entire life so far. And to your point, that feeling of like, this was here the whole time. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's
cool.
It's a thing. It's a scene, man.
Yeah. I think the perfectionism also comes from like believing the narrative that we're lazy, or not trying hard enough, right?
Yes.
But if you can demonstrate you're a rock star everywhere else, maybe people will start to believe you about the things that you say about your health habits too. It's like, I think it actually still goes back to that deep people pleasing. But I definitely noticed, like Lisa, we are a lot alike, but there are a lot of people who are like us within the community who are advocates because it's manifested in very similar ways over the years of just a deep need to prove ourselves because we were told we were lying for years.
Oh, that was a bit of a truth bomb that I didn't plan on this Tuesday. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. No, but I think that's really, really powerful too. And that's a big part. Like, and then I don't want to be wrong about being wrong. You mean all that stuff that I was living by chapter and verse wasn't really going to work for me? Oh, now I'm wrong again, right? 5 coats of shame later, let's go figure out how to navigate life together. It's a lot. I'm seeing a lot of comments about, plastic surgery as well. And I have to say, I think that's a place where we could kind of take the conversation for a few moments as well, because I know similarly, I don't want to scroll because I don't want to mess up my screen, but I know someone there had a comment as well. And I had a very similar experience trying to get skin removal surgery post massive weight loss that had been deemed maybe not massive enough. And again, I try and have grace and space and help people get to the right answers. But I too was, rejected from a referral because of my BMI. And then in the conversation, when they called to tell me that I'd been rejected, they asked me if I had maybe thought of Weight Watchers. And I replied, I actually had 2/3 of my stomach removed to get here. But thank you for that helpful advice. Like it's never ending, right? Woof. So let's talk about your journey with plastics, if you don't mind. I know you're pretty transparent with these things, because I do think it's an important moment that, again, a conversation I've really appreciated having with you, that it isn't about vanity necessarily in this moment. There's a lot of health and science associated with getting this tissue off of our bodies too. But tell us your little journey on plastics.
I'd say first, my philosophy is that excess skin removal should be part of obesity care and the continuum of obesity treatment. So the fact that it's an outright exclusion for the majority of people is insane to me. Like, I think we learn at a young age that the body's largest organ is your skin, and like the damage that you can see is very visible, right? But it's for some reason there's a disconnect. Money is a disconnect, but like this, I think that from, that behavior and medical intervention, surgical intervention, all the way to like once you've achieved a, I think, what do we call your healthy, happy weight, right? Where you believe that, you can live a life that is not constant restriction and you're in a healthy place, to skin removal. So I've had a extended abdominoplasty, so my stomach, I've had my breasts and my arms and thighs done. My insurance only covered my stomach. I 2-to-1, every message I get is about plastic, is overwhelmingly plastic surgery. Because if you think people are private about their weight loss journeys, they are
more protective of
CIA spy level, top secret about plastic surgery. And the culture is changing a little bit, right? It used to be this was something only celebrities did, or only people who were extremely wealthy did. This was something that was, I think, kind of painted as vanity, but we don't talk about it as a response to chronic disease. And for me, my skin health was poor. I had I was on 2 prescription strength powders and creams. I had done more than 1 round of antibiotics for sores that developed. I've lost 245 pounds when they did my stomach. I have a completely flat stomach, and I think my plastic surgeon is a magician, and he was like, "No, you're very tiny." And I was like, I want you to know and believe that no medical professional has ever said that to me. That is I think you're lying, but you're a nice man for saying that. And he was like, "No, we're gonna that's just tissue and skin. That's." So they removed 8.5 pounds from my stomach, but just the quality of life of I would immediately have to take off wet exercise clothes because I was so afraid that any amount of moisture along with the skin was going to be another unsightly sore or something of that nature. But we're so far behind where we need to be with plastic surgery. If anybody is listening and has an advocacy group that wants me to do a video, let me know. But I just think it's not, the access is so low. And the number of questions that we get for skin removal. Oh, claimed on income tax in Canada. Yeah. It's considered cosmetic mostly in the US. I'm sure there's a way to do it. I definitely have that question into my accountant. The way that this sounds really silly, but I was a women's size 28 at my heaviest. I really didn't see the weight loss until, I don't think when I looked in the mirror, I don't think that I saw the body that I had until I had skin removal surgery. It took so long. It's in some ways, it was removing some scars.
Yes. Yeah.
Despite now having lots of literal scars all over my body. So.
No, I agree. When I had my panty removed, I was very lucky. I had to wait almost 3-4 years, but it was fully medically covered. In the end, but I didn't get any muscle repair, which was fine for me. But 15 pounds of tissue that I never could have removed from my body by being on a treadmill or doing anything was removed. And it felt like I was in the right body for the first time in a really long time too, is kind of how I describe it. But that tissue was genuinely not helping my system understand how to process life. It is diseased tissue that needed to be removed. And I completely agree. And I agree with Jimena, who has chimed in the chat, as she's wont to do, about how is that being declined, not considered discrimination. We know this is a treatment. Oh, she's spicy.
I mean, I think it is. And hi, Jimena. But the reason we keep doing it is because they keep getting away with it. Up until I use it, when I tell people this example, they go, was this like 40 years ago? Of like, you used to have to have an IQ requirement for bariatric surgery in the state that I lived in under one of our health insurance providers. And it was like 13 years ago. Like, I had graduated college. Like, after I graduated college, like, we have discriminatory things in place because we have a population who largely believes some of the things that insurers are banking on us believing, right? Like,
yes,
that if I just tried harder, or if I were just smarter, I could get this, I get my weight under control. It's this idea of like, why wouldn't they continue to restrict coverage and access until somebody was mad about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know we have different healthcare systems, and you all have potentially more skin help, but I think, yeah, look, we're gonna start a little
we're on the mad train, Jimena. We're there.
Super. I don't know, like, whenever they ask me that where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Like, there are definitely elements that I know that will be true, but like, me accidentally planning a march is always part of it. Like, I definitely think I'm gonna just someday get so mad that I accidentally like push thousands of people to the streets because people aren't listening to us. Like, the science tells us that we have a disease that improves with treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are like approved medicines that are safe for us. There are surgical interventions that are safe for us. There are a multitude of things that we can provide people who are affected by obesity. We just aren't doing it. And so, like, we keep approaching obesity care as like, we deserve care, or obesity is a disease, is like, we need to get past, like, you believe it or not, like, we need to be more aggressive.
Yes. Like,
I'm happy, and I literally have the US Congress switchboard in my cell phone. And I've been to DC, I've Zoomed, I've like met in offices. Like, we can do this through legislation, but it is speaking up. It is your story. Stories are what change the way people think of the narrative that they've convinced themselves that is true. And it is not always, and most often is not ill-willed. It doesn't come from a negative place. You only know what you know, or you only know the stories you've been told. So tell your story so people start hearing different versions of it and go, wait, this is actually more complex than I thought. Because I think despite a really polarized political system, like, human beings are capable of nuance and changing their minds with new evidence. But we need the science to continue. But the thing that's going to change the way people think about obesity is telling stories. And like, that's what changes minds.
It's very true. And that's something that I think when I talk to our community, or I try to engage with people in this area, and they ask about advocacy or something like that, they don't I don't think everyone needs to be loud and knocking on Parliament's door or something like that, like Lisa and I would do. But if they're speaking up for themselves, and they're adding to that chorus of more people speaking up for themselves, like, imagine a doctor in an office who maybe hasn't had much training on obesity care, but he has one patient come and ask about something, and they brush it off because they don't know, it's not something they were trained about, and it just doesn't really go anywhere. But if they have 10, 15, 20 people who come in are asking about this, there's a demand. And now that's going to change how that care in that office with that doctor and all of his patients are going to experience that. So I think the more of us that are willing to speak up and advocate, even just for ourselves, is going to make a huge difference. It's that groundswell, the groundswell of movement that's going to make all the change.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's something that I think we really saw at that Your Weight Matters conference. And with a lot of what OAC is done in the States, is that really, we admire that grassroots army that seems to be building in the US of these empowered patients. And that's, Ian and I really believe, between the clinical practice guidelines and potentially our, our Canadian approach to obesity care, that's our top down. Our bottom up is to really make sure that all of these patients get the right information and can show up for themselves in that doctor's office and be like, thank you for, talking to me about diet and exercise. Weight isn't a behavior, so I'm going to need a little bit more than that. Or how can we continue this conversation in a more impactful way for me? Anything I can do to help, anything Ian and I can do to try and help people feel a little bit more confident and sit up a little straighter and really understand that overeating doesn't cause obesity. Obesity causes overeating. Remove that from yourself and now tell them to take care of you, because that's their job. And that includes our government officials and our doctors when we're in those rooms. And that it's hard not to come off really defensive at first, but it can be a moment, an education moment. Okay, this might be one where I know a little bit more than you, which is very uneasy when we're in these clinical settings where we want to feel taken care of as well by our practitioners. But they grew up in the same noisy environment that we did, and are exposed to the same kind of misinformation, quite frankly, as the rest of the world. But we're almost at time. So any last little takeaway from you that you want to part ways with, or tell people how to get a hold of you or join you in anything? Amber, this is your moment.
Yeah, I would say that I would want you to walk away with knowing that you're worthy of treatment that is full of dignity and respect. Mm. And so if you aren't experiencing that in a healthcare setting, or you're potentially not speaking to yourself in that way, I would get a medical professional or a mental health professional to help you get to that place where you are either receiving those messages internally or externally, because you can change the narrative. And it's gonna take some work, but you're used to it because that's how you
doing
live
some
your
work.
life.
Yeah.
I am pretty active on Instagram. I'm at Obesity Care Advocate. So follow me. I post a lot. I will answer any message that comes in as well, as long as you're not selling me Bitcoin. Or amberhewittgarcia.com. I do have a blog, and there's just a little bit more about me if you want to learn more. Contact me. I did see there was some questions too, Lisa. So I don't know if at the bottom, I don't know if we wanted to answer them.
Do we have questions, Ian?
There was a few. Some of them, like the ones that I saw, was kind of going along the line of the ADHD, getting that diagnosed as an adult. How was the process for that? And then there was another one.
Yeah, do you want to touch on the ADHD diagnosis for just 1 sec, Amber? You can share what your experience was, and then I can talk a little bit about mine too.
So to actually be able to prescribe medicine in the US, I had to sit for a 4-hour in-person testing. So it was a series of almost like brain exercises, and it was an IQ test here too. And sort of you learned, I actually have combined types, so I have inattentive and hyperactive. So I can lose my attention really easily, but I also I can hyper focus when I'm especially interested in something. But you can also have, during that testing, if you are in school or work and need accommodations, they can determine what accommodations that would be legally allowed to you too. So that's an important aspect if you feel like it's impacting your life. But I think for me, it gave me more information about okay, how does it actually show up? And mine was actually processing. I didn't know that I was a slow processor. I actually a good example is I told him, I've always been bad at math. He's like, you're actually exceptional at math. You need a little bit more time. And I'm like, I wonder what my school experience would have been like if I had known that. And so that, I think those are it was a series, it was with my therapist. And they actually have to see you physically. There are some that'll do it online, but I think the most accurate diagnosis or most comprehensive report, I would encourage you to find a specialist, a therapist who does that in-person testing.
Nice. Awesome. Mine came through the obesity specialist that I was working with, actually recommended it after having worked with me for a few years. So I know in Canada, for me, there was a bit of a survey that I had to take, some conversation with therapists, and then moved on to getting a prescription. So I know it's possible. I know that good care is out there. And I know that there's a lot of doctors who don't wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to go give some crappy care. So they might think they're doing the best by us, and they need to know that they need to do better as well. So to Jimena's points in the chat, let's get loud together, everybody. But some really good takeaways from today. So thank you so much, Amber, for encouraging us to get a little bit louder. That really, I think connection is key, is another big takeaway that I would take from our conversation today. And that really we need to think about our obesity care as really being multi-factored, a bit iterative. As we didn't touch on this today, but this could be a whole other one. You and I were talking about the fear of oncoming menopause. And like, we know life is going to change. Our hormones are going to continue to fluctuate. Bodies are meant to change also, FYI, everybody. So it's not going to be the worst, but it's something, another factor that we really want to be aware of and really take care of ourselves, because if we can't put our own oxygen mask on, what good are we going to be for the rest? So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you for your time and for all that you're putting out into the world, Amber. We really, really appreciate it. We hope everybody enjoyed today's conversation. We want to keep these conversations going. If you're part of our professional community, please join us on OC Connect Pro. If you're part of the patient or general public community, come join us on OC Connect. We're going to continue these conversations going there. You can email us. You can register for our next episode. And I know that there's another Your Weight conference, Your Weight Matters conference coming up. We will have a connected conference in the fall as well. Hopefully we'll be able to make more connections. The chat has been fantastic today as well. So let's keep it going. I hope everybody has an amazing week, rest of this week. Take good care of yourselves, and we look forward to seeing you at the next conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.